Baruchim Abayim, and a big warm welcome to all our guests tonight. Before we begin, I would just like to run through with you the order of the evening and give you some technical tips on how to make the best of it. My name is Charara from the Jewish Community Foundation Trust, and I will be your host for this Salford Healthy Communities event tonight. You may have noticed that everyone is muted. Please stay muted as the sound is very sensitive on these microphones. If you wish to comment or ask a question, please do so on the chat function. Our speakers, when invited to speak, will need to unmute themselves. The event itself will be recorded and a public record made available for those who are not present tonight. You can turn off the camera if you wish, but please put your name on display or your organization's name on display instead of just someone's iPad, for example. Dear audience, we are tremendously privileged to have with us this evening a distinguished guest, Professor Danny Altmann, our guest speaker, who will share with us the latest updates on long COVID and answer any questions you may have. So I will introduce our guest, who will give a presentation, and we will take questions with Professor Altmann. And Dr. Jackie Lewis, Chair of the Salford Healthy Communities, will make some concluding remarks and give a vote of thanks. We aim to finish around 9:30 to 10 p.m. But before we start, here are a few words of introductions for Professor Altmann. Danny Altmann is a British immunologist and Professor of Immunology at Imperial College London. Altmann earned a bachelor's degree from the University of London in 1980 and a PhD from the University of Bristol in 1983 on T-cell immunity to herpes viruses. Altmann is the son of John Altmann, a Jew who arrived as a refugee from the Third Reich on the Kindertransport, and Marlene Altmann, who arrived after the liberation from Auschwitz. Through her, he is in turn the great-grandson of German philanthropist Adolf Sternheim. Altmann runs a research lab at Imperial College's Hammersmith Hospital site, focusing on HLA genes, T cells and NK cells in autoimmunity, cancer, and infectious disease. He has been based there since 1994. Between 2011 and 2013, he was head of pathogens, immunity, and population health at the Wellcome Trust. He is editor-in-chief of Oxford Open Immunology. For 20 years, Altmann was editor of British Society for Immunology, BSI journals, including 14 years as editor-in-chief at Immunology, and is an assistant editor at Vaccine and Frontiers in Immunology. Altmann is a trustee of the Medical Research Foundation. He has sat on the strategy board of the African Research Excellence Fund since its inception. During COVID-19 pandemic, he has served in a number of policy advisor roles. Professor, without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Somebody put their hand up if they can hear me. Somebody, yeah, good. Yeah, so really pleased to be there, at least virtually, and see you all. Really a pleasure to be with you. So what I'll do, if I may, rather than giving you lots of slides on a PowerPoint, I might just improvise and talk for 10 minutes or so until I see people looking bored or falling asleep. And then we'll use that as a kind of springboard, for anything that anybody feels is worth talking about, if that's okay. Thank you for that very, very long introduction. So, it's been a very long 2 years, hasn't it? Obviously it's Purim starting tomorrow, and I very well remember, if I date the kind of COVID experience, the UK went into lockdown on March 23rd, 2020. But when I think about kind of Erev Purim 2020, which was 2 weeks earlier than that, that was kind of the last day that we drove home from the hospital in the evening and thought that life on the streets looked remotely normal. And since then, it hasn't really been normal, has it? So I guess that was something like March the 10th or 11th, 2020, when we went into this craziness. And, for everybody, it's been an absolutely mad, unprecedented, unexpected time. For us, it's been very, very busy. It's been kind of 7 days a week of work, which has been a kind of cocktail of, frontline COVID stuff. So we're people who work a lot in infectious disease, in viral immunology, and in autoimmunity. And also what happened bizarrely was that suddenly there was an insatiable demand for so-called experts on COVID. And of course, there weren't any experts on COVID because we'd never had COVID or known COVID. So I gradually found that lots of people got my telephone number and my email address, and I was getting 10 or 20 phone calls per day about television interviews and radio interviews and newspaper interviews and World Health Organization meetings and meetings in the House of Parliament and the House of Lords. And suddenly there was, I think, a genuine interest in talking about this stuff and understanding it and trying to decide what to do about it. So, so I've been going to a ton of meetings and doing a ton of research and publishing lots of papers on it. And, it's stating the obvious, isn't it, to say that we've been through an awful lot of phases and stages. And I think we have to be very kind of nimble to keep reassessing how we evaluate what's going on and how we respond to what's going on. Because, if I took you on a kind of quick tour of our very steep learning curve that we've all been on in the last 2 years, obviously, we had that period in January, February 2020 of, what the hell is this thing? Is it coming our way? How bad is it? How serious is it? Then the cases started to appear in the UK, and it did come our way, and it was very serious. And we had that really desperate period when we were watching the deaths and the hospitalizations and feeling very helpless and very desperate and very scared. And just when we thought that we might maybe get it under control at the end of that first year, when the vaccines started to come online after really, really amazing work, the first of the variants of concern hit us, the one that was initially called Kent and was then called Alpha. And then we realized that these variants of concern were going to kind of keep on setting us back over and over again, because in the world, in the meantime, notably, we've had Alpha and Beta and Gamma and Delta and now Omicron, and now kind of son or daughter of Omicron, BA2. And every time we think we're coming to the light of the end of the tunnel, it sets us back in a kind of slightly new and different and bizarre way. And so obviously we've had enormous mitigation from some really amazing vaccines. And I'm terribly, we've done lots of work on that, and I'm very happy to talk about them and compare notes on them and think about them. Because, we've never really done such a big global vaccine program ever before so fast and, so massively. And it really brings home that, everybody's different and everybody has different concerns. And there isn't a typical human being on planet Earth. And some are in primary school and some are in secondary school and some are middle-aged and some are quite old. And some are taking drugs for their arthritis and some are taking drugs for their leukemia and some are taking drugs for their irritable bowel disease. And every single person you speak to has a different story and a different response to their vaccine and a different requirement of their vaccine, and different worries, because people are different and people are complex. And so all of that was going on, and we were trying to assess step by step the immunology of all of these variants and how people responded to vaccines and how we could optimize the vaccines and how we could persuade people to use the vaccines. And then obviously by the time we got, 9 or 12 months through it, there was something else creeping up on us, which is, I don't know about any of you, but I was, long before I heard anything about it in medicine, I was bumping into friends, because obviously so many friends had COVID, and they were saying there's something really weird about this, because I had it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 months ago, and I'm really not the same person as I was, and I can no longer do the gardening, or I can no longer play golf, or I can no longer play tennis, or I can no longer cycle to work, or I can no longer think straight. And at the beginning, we didn't have a name for it, and then we had too many names for it, and in the end, the kind of patient groups won through, at least in this country, where it's called long COVID. So we've started to work a lot, not just on COVID, but also on long COVID, and we're doing a very big national study to look at mechanisms of long COVID. So if I were to kind of pull together what I think about the state of play, first of all on long COVID, and then where I think we sit 2 years later in terms of COVID, and then we can chat and do some questions on long COVID. I think it's a thing, and a real thing, and it's not in anybody's mind, it's not in anybody's imagination. It's a physiological consequence of having a really nasty virus in your body. And as many of you will know, from articles and things, there've been quite a lot of studies now, both to count it and to characterize it. And we've gone round and round in circles about this and bickered about it endlessly. But I think we basically agree now that of everybody on planet Earth who's ever had infection by this virus, which at a kind of low estimate is, maybe 500 million people, something like 10% of them have not recovered over the first few months and have had long COVID. So, we're talking about, at least probably 50 million people on planet Earth, which makes it a really enormous new disease on top of COVID to grapple with. Of those 50 million on planet Earth, we know about something like 1.3 to 1.5 million of them in the UK. And there's been great work from the patient support groups to do questionnaires and things and characterize what on earth it is. And again, if any of you have it or know anybody who has it, it's this really, it's really ghastly spectrum of hundreds of different symptoms that kind of co-occur in different packages in a relapsing and remitting way, but incorporate things like breathlessness and wheezing and loss of taste and loss of smell and brain fog and headaches and migraines and fevers and gastrointestinal symptoms and exercise intolerance and hundreds of others that I won't name, skin blisters and skin rashes and just on and on and on. I won't go into a ton of the immunology of it, but there's a lot of theories out there about what it is, many or most of which might all be true, or perhaps just some of them, that it's either direct damage by the virus and kind of scarring and fibrosis caused by the virus in different organs in the body, and or it's having a kind of persistent reservoir of virus in the body that hasn't been cleared and hasn't gone away, and or it's a bit like glandular fever, especially when you get teenagers who get a really horrible bout of glandular fever when they first go to university and discover kissing and things. How they can be really out of action for terms and terms of feeling really washed out. Is it like that? The idea of having a virus on board that's really disrupted your immune system, or is it more like some other infections where we know that infection is followed by a full-blown de novo autoimmune disease, the way that some bacterial infections lead to arthritis, or the way that chikungunya virus also leads to arthritis, one of those kind of things. So we and others are really working full steam ahead at the moment to work on mechanisms of long COVID. We care, because we're curious and trying to work out what it is. Also, because we feel like those 50 million people on planet Earth can't really access treatment or get a fair deal unless we can diagnose them, find them, refer them to a care pathway, have somebody in that care pathway who's got the foggiest notion what to do for them, or what tests to order, or how to work out what's wrong with them. And again, no point in doing that unless, having done all of that, there's some way of treating them and giving them something to make them feel better. Because I think one of the themes that's very familiar when you speak to people with long COVID is they don't want to be counseled or made to readjust to their new life or made to feel better about it. They just want their old life back. People don't want to feel unwell for months and months or years and years. All the more so, I think, when, because of the nature of the first and second wave that we had with this virus, so many people who have long COVID have it, if you like, as an occupational disease that they disproportionately were exposed to and got because they were school teachers, educators, nurses, care home workers, doctors, what have you. They were in the line of fire, and it seems doubly brutally unfair that they're now in many cases just really struggling to know how to cope with it. So I see the long COVID efforts as moving forward on many different battlefronts, both my kind of core territory of biomedical research, but also just establishing the care pathways, establishing the guidelines, even establishing the employment law of how are people who were exposed to this, who now haven't got their old lives and haven't got their old jobs, how are they going to have a fair and decent way of carrying on with their lives? So I think about that, and I'm preoccupied with that a lot. And sort of before I sort of bore you rigid, just one more bit. I think there's a lot of confusion at the moment and polarization in terms of where are we with COVID? Is it finishing? Are we there yet? Are we safe yet? Can I go out without a mask on? Should I get another booster? All of those kind of questions. So I think we're all very divided and polarized and uncertain compared to those certainties that we had a year or 2 years ago. So all I can do is give you my take on it. Maybe I'll preface that by saying that we're all now, we're not in lockdown. We're all making different decisions. Sorry, one of the regular interviews that I do is on a radio program for the BBC with somebody called Vanessa Feltz, who you may have heard, and she's quite chatty. And she always kind of torments me at the end and says, so tell me, Danny, give us some guidelines. Are you going to the cinema? Are you going to restaurants? Are you going to cafes? Have you let your family out yet? And nearly always I kind of disappoint her and say, we've been really boring. And except for working, we haven't been anywhere or done anything or eased up our lockdown, hardly at all really yet. And that's more or less still true. So, we are kind of quite boring and cautious. And still worrying about it. And so the reason that we're worrying about it, although obviously, and I try never to be, political or partisan, but we have a government who have kind of decided that they have to take steps out of the pandemic and normalize and get everybody back to normal. And all I can say is that when I kind of religiously study those graphs every day and the cases, and we're all looking at that data, aren't we, of number of cases, number of hospitalizations, number of deaths, number on intensive care, I see a different pattern, much less worrying than it was 18 months ago, but it still worries me. So I see in every part of the United Kingdom, I see cases going up again. I see new cases going up nearly as high now as in our kind of scariest recent episode around the turn of the new year. I see us heading at the moment fully on schedule for 50,000 excess deaths per year still, which is something I never thought we'd tolerate in this country because you don't, who wants to tolerate, avoidable deaths? And I see scary things. So if you look at those graphs of how the numbers are climbing at the moment, the most steeply rising part of that graph is in schools, is in the 5 to 17-year-olds, and first of all, we don't want kids off school because if they're off school ill, then they're not in education, and they've got the same risk as the adults of long COVID, so maybe around 10%. And so a child who gets long COVID is, they're going to be in trouble. They're going to really risk, missing out and mucking up their GCSEs or their A-levels or whatever it is they're doing. And it's not fair, and it's not right, and it's not kind. So I do think we've got to look after our school children carefully and not let it run kind of rampant through our schools. So yeah, so I hate it when I go onto things and I'm presented as some kind of misery guts professor who's all kind of doom and gloom and thinks we're not there yet and it's not okay yet. And I accept that we have to kind of rebuild our lives and carry on and move on from the last 2 years, and that's fair enough. But I guess my message would be that we do still have a bit of a storm out there, which is the combination of this new subvariant that's around BA2, which is 30% even more transmissible again than Omicron, which was the most transmissible thing we'd ever dreamt of in our wildest nightmares. We are quite far out from the last boosters and have quite a lot of people with waning immunity. And we have kind of let rip a little bit in terms of all feeling like it's good to go on public transport and shopping centres and things without masks and without social distancing. And I guess it's all of those three things that are feeding into the caseload. So I'm not trying to be a misery, and I'm not trying to terrify you. But I think all I'm saying, and maybe I'll shut up after this and let other people talk, is please keep your guard up. If you can wear a mask, do wear a mask. If you don't need to take that risk, don't take it. And if you're not fully vaccinated and boosted, please do it. So maybe I'll leave it there as my kind of opening offer, and we'll see what other people want to talk about.
Thank you, Professor, for really informative and illuminating talk and meaningful overview of a subject that is really of concern to all of us. What we will do, we have some questions that are already in here. I will ask some of those questions, and then we will open it up to the audience, and people can then, when invited, unmute themselves and ask a question. Professor Silman, who I'm sure you do know from Oxford University, just recently published an article where he's talking about the rise in the incidence of cases in the UK between 20 and 40%. And also we know that around the world, because of we are interconnected, there are spots where it is rising again. I mean, this is really unprecedented. We've never had, normally it's the bell curve, it goes up and it comes down, but this time we keep having these variants that are popping up from just about everywhere. So, and we've got the vaccine and we've got the protection. Is this usual? Is it usual to have a virus that is behaving in this way?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I kind of feel that in general, it's kind of not usual. So we all thought we were very smart, and so for example, when you mentioned that I'd spent some years at the Wellcome Trust. When I was at the Wellcome Trust, I sat at the top table with people like Barack Obama's biosecurity advisors in Washington, D.C., and we talked about pandemic threats. And we thought we were the bee's knees, and we thought we knew it all, and we thought we were prepared for everything. And then this thing came along, and we all looked like total idiots. So we didn't know what we were talking about, and we weren't remotely ready for it. And even now, when we try and be smart, and people try and predict that this may, in the end, bottom out and become more like the common cold, because we know the common cold viruses came into the human population in the same way, from the animal kingdom and infected us, and in the end became quite benign. But I often think when I hear things like that, it's kind of wishful thinking, because for the common cold viruses to become benign took hundreds of years. None of us are patient enough to wait hundreds of years for the situation to calm down.
Indeed. I mean, that is the comparison that a lot of people do make of this virus, and they say that it mimics the symptoms of a cold, yeah. But when it's nasty, it can be pneumonia and so on. So there's a question here regarding children. How great is the incidence of long COVID in children, and do they have the same symptoms and duration of illness as adults?
Yeah. So some of you will know there's a long COVID kids support group that has many thousands of members, sadly. And they're really sad little things. They're kids, in many cases, who haven't been able to go to school now for 6, 12, 18 months. So I'm not sure there's enough work yet. So there's a suspicion that maybe the symptoms aren't entirely the same. So at the beginning, we were all very taken up with a very extreme form of COVID in children that was called PIMS. That was a kind of cytokine storm kind of disease, a bit like Kawasaki disease, if anybody knows that. But now when we talk about long COVID in kids, we're not talking about that. We're talking about kids who just are very, very poorly and have a lot of gastrointestinal problems, and really find it very, very hard to return to school or to return to normal activity levels. So we're certainly doing research with various different pediatric teams to look at the events in the children and try and work out what's going on. If you ask, is it as common as it is in adults? I think it's probably slightly less common. And don't forget that we've been on a kind of journey in terms of COVID in children, haven't we? Because at the beginning, in the kind of, if you like, the Wuhan wave and the Alpha variant wave, we kind of told ourselves it wasn't really a disease of children. And indeed, it was kind of true that the hospitals were filled with the kind of over 65s, not the under 18s. And as the years have gone by, 2 years have gone by, and the variants have changed, that's slightly different. And now the curve has shifted, and it's much more of a disease of young people as well.
Yes, I mean, that is very much what we do here, and especially with the latest variant, the Omicron. There was a huge spike in the number of cases, as you did say, in schools and so on. Just as a follow-on from that question, we've been asked, what are, talking about vaccines and so on in children, what are the pros and cons of vaccination in that particular population?
Yeah, so you'll have gathered from everything I said up to now that I think that the vaccines that came on board during the first year were amazing and miraculous, and got us out of an enormously deep hole, and certainly saved some millions of lives. And I still think that, and I'm enormously impressed by them and enormously proud of them. So if people can follow all that stuff, you'll know, for example, that Israel, for example, got a lot of publicity because in each of the sort of vaccination waves, they were kind of at the front of the pack in terms of first to vaccinate, then first to boost, then first to vaccinate secondary school children, then first to vaccinate primary school children. And I've seen a preprint today, actually, of the summary of the results from the first, I think it's 275,000 primary school children who were immunized with the Pfizer vaccine, 2 doses in Israel. So I'm guessing, I don't know how many primary school children there are in Israel, but I guess 275,000 must be a fair slice of the primary school children. And, the results have been brilliant, and, almost no adverse events and an enormous amount of protection from any kind of severe or symptomatic disease. So like we vaccinate our children against all kinds of other horrible things, why on earth would you not want to vaccinate them against this?
Indeed. I mean, there's discussion as we speak regarding polio vaccinations, and the same. I'm sure that same principle applies there. Mm. But we have a question regarding the variants that we have, and the question is, will the long COVID presentation be the same, or the symptoms and so on and so forth be the same for the Omicron variant as regards another variant? Are there any differences there?
Yeah, no, it's a terribly important question, and obviously a work in progress. And it's a tricky work in progress, isn't it? Because if you think about it, there's a 20-24 month gap between the initial wave of infections that caused long COVID and the current wave. And so we've got quite a lot of variables to look at, haven't we? So on the one hand, we've got a very different virus. We've got a virus that's, in inverted commas, considered milder. And we've also got people who meet it, hopefully haven't been vaccinated with 1, 2, or 3 doses of some quite effective vaccines. So lots of reasons why the situation might be different. I kind of hoped that new long COVID cases would be a thing of the past, and that we wouldn't have any new ones, because of having a vaccinated population and a milder Omicron. But the people in the long COVID support groups tell me that new members are pouring into their groups, as in people who just, even from Omicron and Delta, simply haven't got better. So maybe it's not as good as I was hoping. But perhaps there are new long COVID cases from the Delta and Omicron waves.
Indeed, and I'm sure as we speak, there are support groups that are forming and so on to try and mitigate some of the consequences of this. I don't know, but there's a follow-up question here, whether it's possible to answer this or not, and to start to look at the long-term prognosis for this condition, whether it is something that will perhaps be as chronic as, say, ME or and so on, or whether there is any hope of total remission from it.
It's a question I get asked a lot, and I never quite know what to say or what the what the parallels are to draw on, because if I think about similar things that I've ever seen in my life, the first example I gave of the kind of teenager who gets glandular fever and then gets a kind of persistent syndrome afterwards, many of those would hope to be more or less back to normal maybe a year later. But that can't quite be right, because we've got lots of long haulers that are heading for 2 years already. Similarly, the next one I mentioned, and chikungunya virus, this thing that's you get from mosquitoes in warm countries, people get really disabled by that, and they're often better within a few years, although it's quite severe while they have it. And then, as you mentioned, less clearly defined, but many of the ME sufferers have been out of action for many, many years. So I don't really know, where to look to find an answer.
Indeed, this is really uncharted territory for all of us. Well, one more question, Professor, before we take some questions from the chat and from our audience. And that is some research that's come out recently on the psychological, I'm a psychologist myself, on the psychological and cognitive effects of long COVID. And the research has shown that there's a significant decline in cognitive functions such as memory deficit. You did mention loss of smell and loss of concentration and so on. Could you tell us more?
Well, I'm almost reluctant to answer because the answers are are a bit scary. For me, the clincher is that one of the greatest resources. We have many resources in Britain that I'm quite proud of that you don't necessarily have in places, say like the USA. So one of the things we have is UK Biobank, which was a resource of hundreds of millions of pounds spent on trying to kind of map 100,000 people across the UK. And for that study, one of the most recent publications is the one in Nature last week, where they do MRI, magnetic resonance imaging of the brain in people who had COVID, even quite mild COVID, and showing quite scary changes in brain structure and brain shrinkage and nasty, nasty things that that the virus does to your brain. So I guess I have got scary now. So all I would say is, if anybody convinces you to just, get a life, ignore it, let rip, it won't do you any harm, you've got to get it sometime, just don't listen to them.
Indeed, and that is what we see, and what the professionals do tell us up and down.
Can I interrupt a minute? Because on my screen, I can see for ages there've been two hands up on the top left-hand corner of my screen.
Yes, indeed.
One is Iris and Michael, one is Karen Cass.
We have some people.
Yeah.
So please go ahead and unmute yourself. And so we have Iris and Michael. Would you like to go first?
Yeah. First of all, Professor Altmann, thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk, really thorough, and I really appreciate that. This Thursday, it's actually 2 years since I actually contacted COVID. I was very, very poorly with it. I won't go into all the details. It was basically shutting down, and I wasn't actually expected to survive. I spent about 3.5 months in hospital. It took me probably about 3 to 4 months to learn to walk again. I'm doing really, really well, actually. But I still have long COVID now after 2 years. So the main problem I've got is really fatigue, which I'll cover in a minute. But I've got other small things as well. I've got brain fog, so I find it difficult to find words sometimes. Or if I'm talking to somebody to change a subject, I find it very difficult to pick up on the new subject. So these are sort of things, a little other things, bits and pieces. But on the fatigue side, the thing I've noticed is that I can, to a certain extent, control it. So most days I do get fatigue, and it's actually increased with the vaccine. If I'm particularly busy or active, it doesn't seem to kick in quite as quickly. Whereas if I'm not doing very much, I get it very, very sick. I need to go to bed and have a sleep for 2 or 3 hours. So I'm wondering if there's a certain amount of psychology involved that I actually can control. I'm doing my best. I'm generally a very active person, but this is something that I've actually observed and noticed. And the other question is on the vaccines themselves. I've had the 3 vaccines, and every time I've had a really, really bad reaction to it. And it's taken about 24 to 48 hours to have to go up the stairs, to do things, to lift my arms up, and eventually it goes away. And I was talking to a doctor the other day, and he suggested that when I have my 4th vaccine, I should suggest that they give me a lower dosage, because they say that, I've got all the antibodies, so the lowest dosage should reduce the reaction. I just wonder what you thought about that as well.
Yeah, no, really good point. So I'm really sorry you've had such a horrible time. Everything you said really encapsulates the situation much better than I managed, because it's your life and it's real life. So a couple of things I'd say. One is that, all of those symptoms that you're talking about in your long COVID, I don't think they should be forever. I don't think it'd be fair if we left you to suffer forever. And the target at the moment is to work out what on earth is going on, do some really fancy immunology, work out what the mechanism is, and then go to the bag of goodies and work out what we could give people to make them better. And that's serious business. That's not just making it up. That's the plan. Because I don't think it would be fair to say to people, well, that's your life now. Tough luck. So that's the first thing. And the other thing to say is that I think that we're kind of in a difficult state of flux with the vaccines. So the fact that you had such a bad reaction to the vaccines makes me wonder whether you're one of those people on planet Earth who's got long COVID because maybe you've got some virus hanging around somewhere or something and you never quite cleared it. And there certainly are people around like that. And when you hear people talk about the future, they imply that we'll be queuing up every 6 months forevermore to get our next dose and our next dose and our next dose of Pfizer. In my mind, I'm not confident that's the right answer at all, and then that's what we will be doing. There are many vaccines out there, some much more durable than others, some better, some worse. There's, I think, 24 or 25 licensed vaccines around the world at the moment. And I hope that we'll kind of stop and take a deep breath and work out what the best next steps are in terms of which vaccines to give, and not just keep on doing the same damn thing forever, because, for you, it hasn't been very nice.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. We have Karen Kais. Would you like to ask a question?
Love to, although it seems a little trivial in light of what Michael's going through, but I guess our lives are all our own lives. And I suppose that we're all here also because we're all sufferers and want to know exactly what's going to happen to us. So I had COVID more or less 2 years ago, February 2020. And like Michael, I'm still exhausted most of the time, but that I can deal with by having a quick slough. However, my taste and my smell are still altered. Is there anything that you know of that is coming in terms of research into this, or whether there's some sort of cure? My doctor laughed when I told them and said, "Oh, it can't be COVID. You had COVID over 2 years ago." It didn't help. Didn't cure it.
No, I think it's so there's lots of papers and mechanisms described for the kind of olfactory nerve attack of COVID. So I think it's a real thing, and it's horrible and perverse, and it's one of the things that we and other people are trying to investigate. And can't say many. The only positive things I can say are that anecdotally, it is one of the things I've heard about as going away with time. And the other thing, I shouldn't joke about it, but I never feel jealous of people, but lots of people told me that they'd, all the foods and all the fattening foods and all the beer and pizza and everything they used to like was no longer any fun. So they weren't eating any naughty foods at the moment.
No, you just try harder and eat double.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Oh, so I was thinking, wow, that would be amazing if I never ate anything.
No, that would be amazing. No, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I do hear reports of it going with time, but it's horrible. It's just horrible.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Professor. We do have more questions coming in through chat as well. Some of them do relate to this very question that we've just heard the answer to around the sense of smell. Others ask questions about how to monitor one's health generally if they suspect or if they have long COVID. And we have a questioner here who asks, having caught COVID after 2 vaccines, what are the odds of catching long COVID after that?
Yeah, really important question. So again, I think there's been one big study on it that says that I think it came out of the Zoe app actually, that if you're vaccinated, it should halve your chances of long COVID. But the reason that you can hear some sort of hesitation in my voice is that the Omicron wave has been so sneaky and so difficult that kind of all bets are off. We all know amongst our friends endless anecdotes of people who've had Omicron despite being 3 days vaccinated, of people who've had quite symptomatic lingering Omicron despite being 3 days vaccinated, of people who've had Omicron twice. So it's just a horrible thing that is quite immune evasive, and even notwithstanding how good the vaccines are, kind of sneaks past them. So so I hope I'm not being confusing. What I'm saying is, yes, the vaccines are amazing. Yes, you're so much better off having them than not having them. But in the face of Omicron, there's still no guarantee.
Indeed. That is exactly where we are at the moment, and a lot of people have reflected just that thought. We have Ruth Jacobs, who would like to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. I saw somebody in the chat talks about fibromyalgia. Before I got COVID in March, this time 2 years ago, and I was not as bad as Michael, but I certainly was really ill enough to be hospitalized, and then and because I became so dehydrated. Before that, a year before, I was diagnosed with lupus, and since then I've also been diagnosed now with fibromyalgia as a result of the long COVID that I have. The trouble for me is that the three things, long COVID, lupus, and fibromyalgia, the symptoms are all very similar. And get very mixed up. I can empathize with the brain fog. I find that absolutely so frustrating, and it's hard to know how to deal with it. And when you spoke about whether, one of my questions is that I often wonder, am I ever going to get better out of this, or just is it something we have to learn to live with and accept? The fatigue is awful at times. And some days I feel much better and think, oh, it's going, and then it comes wham. And I feel the other thing I should say is that I was very lucky to be able to be referred to a long COVID clinic. I've had every single possible option offered to me, but quite a lot of it is, it's still, most of it is online, and as such, or through Zoom conversations, and as such, it all becomes too overwhelming, all these different things to have to deal with, whether it's fatigue, whether it's muscle ache, whether it's breathing difficulties, whatever it is, there comes a point where you think to yourself, well, to hell with it, I just have to get over it myself. And I wonder how many other people feel like that.
Yeah, no, I think you've raised so many interesting points. So, things like overlap with things like lupus and fibromyalgia. When I first started talking and thinking about long COVID, one of the analogies that I used most often was lupus, because long COVID looks a bit like lupus, doesn't it? People would say, but how can it be a disease that affects brain fog and your gut and your wheeziness and your tiredness? And I said, well, hang on a minute, for the first 200 or 300 years, people didn't understand lupus. And if you had a patient who came to see you in clinic, and one appointment they said, there's something really going on here because I've got some real kind of respiratory problems, and you tried to treat them for that, and then you saw them half a year later, and they said, no, what I meant was, I've got real renal problems, it's all about my kidneys. And then you saw them another 6 months later, and they said, oh, I've got real central nervous system problems. You'd think they were a loon, but they'd be right and you'd be wrong, because it's all the same thing. It's all making a load of autoimmune antibodies against, in this case, against DNA and histones. So it's a single disease process that reads out in lots of different symptoms. So I think we can learn from that for long COVID. I think there might be quite a lot of overlap. So I just feel like, I don't want to be bluffing, but I feel like if we could work out the mechanisms and work out, for example, which antibodies are causing the problems, there would be ways to make you better. I really think there would be. I'm quite interested to hear from you and anybody else on the call what the flavour of the long COVID clinics around where you are is, and whether they're going well or whether they're not, or how it's all working out.
Well, for myself, I can just answer that I'm in Birmingham,
and
the long COVID clinic, which has all been on Zoom. There's been nothing. I haven't been to anything real. The practitioners I've seen have been very helpful and very kind and want to help me. But I'm coming to the thought that in the end, it's down to me. It's about my attitude towards things, my desire. I need to curb the desire to be better quickly and to accept the fact that it'll take time and be more patient with myself. I'm not a very patient person.
Well, it will take time, but if you're in Birmingham, I don't know if you ever saw a wonderful South African lady called Alex Richter, but I think she's absolutely amazing and gets long COVID as well as anybody on the planet. She really understands it.
What is she?
She's a clinical immunologist at the hospital.
Tell me her name again, Alex.
Richter, Richter, and she's an absolute wonder.
And which hospital, do you know?
I've forgotten the name. What's the name of the really big one?
Queen Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that is fascinating. Thank you very much. As I was listening to the response, I was just thinking in my mind, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of instances where it was people were presenting with COVID. So there's a multi-system deficit somewhere, whether it's people had a kidney disease and then there was COVID, or they had lung disease and then there was COVID. So the question then becomes, and even including, the question becomes, should we perhaps start looking at personalized vaccines and personalized treatment, because each person presents differently, and there is no one size fits all. I don't know whether that's even possible. I don't know, Professor.
Well, what I'd say is, certainly a lot of things we're talking about for long COVID, if we ever get our act together and work out what we're doing, I think will have to be kind of personalized. And the other thing I think about the vaccines is again similar, that if any of you get the chance, I think it's free online, the journal Science, which is kind of the American Association of Science journal, did a special issue last Thursday to mark the second anniversary of declaration of the pandemic. And we wrote the main piece in that about the future of vaccines. And what we said was very much that if you look at all the problems we face now about vaccine waning and different populations, the very young, the very old, people with cancer, people with different diseases, we can't just do it in automatic pilot. We need to look at the individual needs and the individual immune monitoring and work out, who needs which kind of vaccine.
Indeed, thank you. That is what I keep hearing from other quarters too, and people have mentioned that. We have.
I can see Belinda.
Yes, Gilda. Hyman, would you like to go ahead?
Me?
Yes. Yeah. I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Hi, Professor Altmann. First of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for your very interesting and thought-provoking talk. And I used to get really excited when I saw you on BBC News, and I kept saying to my partner, Anthony, oh, it's that Jewish professor who's on TV. So I've just got a couple of really short questions. First of all, I wanted to ask you, do you think that COVID did actually emerge as a result of genetic modification from a lab in the Far East? And second of all, in the future, can you see like the flu jab and the COVID vaccine being administered together, so in the same vial together?
Yeah, so I'll do them in that order. So, what do I think about the origins of the virus? So, I've never ever been a person who was convinced that the sort of genetic signature of that virus looked like anything that had been artificially manipulated. Yeah, and we've looked at lots of different viruses and related bat viruses and things, and it just looks like those. It doesn't look like it's been played with in any way. I was more unsure and more agnostic about how could one tell the difference between something that went from wild bats to pangolins or whatever in that food market to people, or something that went from wild bats to a technician in the lab, escaped by accident and came out again. So I was a little bit doubtful about how you could tell the difference between those two things. There was a terribly good paper in Science about a month ago saying that they thought the weight of evidence really was in favor of the idea we started with, that it was just really bad practice with wild animals in that food market. And again, you know, I don't want to be scaremongering or terrifying, but in certain animals on the planet, including in particular bats, we're surrounded by hundreds of viruses like this, just waiting to cross over and attack us. And, you know, if you think about it, you know, the 20th century leading into the 21st century has been quite a scary time, hasn't it? Because in terms of those crossovers are called zoonoses, and we went from HIV to Ebola to SARS to MERS to COVID. So they're kind of becoming more frequent. And I think it's to do with the kind of, you know, mucky, invasive way that we live on the planet. So that's my first answer. My other answer is I think if we only knew precisely which COVID vaccine to agree on, I think COVID and flu co-vaccination is absolutely a thing and the thing. And there's been quite a few quite good studies on it already, and it's very safe and very good and very sensible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I do see Gilda Hyman indicating. Gilda?
Yeah. Hi. I was hospitalised with COVID in January 21. I was in hospital for 6 days. My main problem was low oxygen, which I suffered from for quite a while after I came home as well. I had amongst the bad fatigue I've still got breathlessness. I've now been diagnosed as having angina, so I have difficulty sometimes telling the difference between the two. But my biggest worry, I can deal with those things. As somebody says, you go to bed, you have a sleep, you get up and you get going again. My biggest worry is my brain fog. I had an amazing brain. I never forgot anything. I didn't need a diary. I didn't need a calendar. And it was literally one day, straight from getting COVID, somebody turned off the lights. I can't remember things. I get mixed up when I'm saying things. And what concerns me very much from this is my late father had dementia. So I know what I'm talking about when I say the confusion and the forgetfulness. And if a few people are talking in the room, I can't take stuff in. Now, my doctor has arranged and done a brain scan for me. My brain scan has come back as there's nothing wrong with my brain, and I'll be going to the memory clinic. But this worries me as to how long this can go on, because it is very frustrating for me. And yes, also because I've seen it with my dad. Am I going to end up maybe getting dementia from this?
Yeah, no, I think it's really scary, and I know people have talked about it and written scary articles in the newspapers about it. All I can say, I think, to try and reassure is, you know, I know your brain is special, but you know, at the end of the day, your brain is just an organ like any other in your body, like your lungs or your kidney or your heart. And if you've got inflammatory things going on anywhere else because of the virus, you can have them in your brain as well. And sure, you know, certainly if you've got inflammatory chemicals in your brain, that's going to give you brain fog. So I think when the long COVID goes away and when the symptoms go away, either because people work out which medicines to give or because it passes, I think your brain will be back to normal. I really do. So I don't think this is the route to dementia. I think it'll get better.
Okay, thank you. But the thing that worries me is, and I say to my friends, I say, well, you know, we're all getting older. I'm 69 now, and it says, oh, you know, we're all forgetful. But when you've had a good memory, it's very difficult to deal with when it's just gone.
No, you don't. There's no reason to accept it. You shouldn't accept it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you for that. As we wait for more questions from the chat, I was just thinking, long COVID wasn't around last year. We didn't know about it, but we did hear stories of people suffering afterwards, after getting COVID. Professor, how did it come about, and were you there involved from the start?
Well, you know, I don't think any professional should claim any kind of honor for this, because it wasn't something that came out of the clinics or the medical textbooks or anything. It came out of the sufferers and the support groups, and you know, so many things have been new and unprecedented in the time of COVID. But if there's maybe a good thing, it's been, you know, the new way that we do medicine, that it's really been, if you like, kind of led by people power. And, you know, so in the chat, there was discussion of things like long COVID support. And, you know, they've completely, you know, driven this debate. And so, you know, so for example, I think the UK was, you know, has done so many things wrong in this pandemic, but we were kind of at the front of the pack, or near the front of the pack, for recognizing that long COVID was a thing, deciding to put money into counting long COVID, then deciding to put quite a lot of money into researching long COVID. And that's all been, you know, not because of any genius on the part of myself or any other professionals. It's been because of pressure from some really, you know, articulate and driven and social media savvy people with long COVID.
Indeed, yes, and we did start to hear it, you know, as long ago as 6 months or so into the pandemic, of people having had it and been hospitalized, and then not realizing why they were still suffering with it. There was a question in the chat there of someone asking, what are the chances of long COVID after, say, 3 vaccines plus antivirals, and the possibility of fibromyalgia? What would be the chances of catching long COVID?
You know, so in a rational world, you really hope. So I can see that Jackie Lewis has got her hand up. So we'll get to her next.
Yes.
In a rational world, you know, you really hope and assume that immunology means something, and if you've had your 3 doses of vaccine, you've got, hopefully, even faced with evasion by Omicron, you've got quite a lot of neutralizing antibodies on board, and therefore you're less likely to get infected in the first place. If you do get infected, it's likely to be milder, and the data says that maybe you're half as likely as before to see that progress to long COVID. And yet, you know, such wacky times that there are still people getting long COVID, even after very mild disease. So you know, so what can I say? The answer is the chances are a bit lower, or quite a lot lower, we hope, than they would have been 18 months, 24 months ago. But they're, you know, they're not nothing. You know, they're still there.
Indeed. Dr. Jackie Lewis?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, struggling to unmute myself. So it's a bit double-stranded, this question. Firstly, one of my relations has got really troublesome vertigo. Only been for a few weeks yet, so I'm really hoping it's not long COVID, but I've not specifically heard of that symptom very much in terms of long COVID. And obviously it's so debilitating if you feel that dizzy all the time. And the second part of the question is just that I think I mentioned that I'm trying to write a little piece on diet for long COVID, and I'm aware things like anti-inflammatory type diet, Mediterranean diet is helpful, things that may help the microbiome, like probiotics and prebiotics, hopefully, things that can help prevent leaky gut, perhaps keeping amounts of gluten low, for example, and not having so much processed food. And maybe, again, diet for the mitochondria, looking at things like having plenty of healthy fats, not having too many snacks, not overeating, and getting exercise as well for the mitochondria. But where I'm really struggling is finding good evidence for these things. There doesn't seem to be so much research on diet around helping long COVID, even though it's known it can help with ME. And again, there are some supplements that are used for ME, things like magnesium, CoQ10, selenium. Might they have a place in helping with long COVID?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good and difficult question, isn't it? So, particularly when like Karen Katz was saying, you could have the best intentions in the world to try and kind of eat your way healthily through it, but if you've lost your taste and smell, and some people say that everything tastes rotten or everything tastes like cigarettes, or things like you try and improve your diet in the face of that. But I do obviously concur with a lot of things you were saying, that in general, in the world of all immunology, so we work on lots of different things, on autoimmunity, on immune therapy treatment for cancer, and there's a whole subject, isn't there, within immunology that says that there's an additional organ in your body, which is the species of bacteria that you keep in your gut, your microbiota, and they're in dialogue with your immune system all the time. And the bottom line is that if you've got a high fiber and not a high fat diet, you're going to promote completely different species, which are going to interact with your immune system completely differently, which are going to be much healthier, much more anti-inflammatory, and promote the kind of immune system you want. So yes, there's substance to that argument.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And with the vertigo, is that a symptom that you're coming?
Well, so I'm trying to remember whether I've seen it singled out before, but obviously there are papers and papers, aren't there, about postural issues and postural dizziness and POTS in terms of dysautonomia in long COVID. So I'd be pretty convinced it probably would be part of a long COVID type thing, because it's essentially another variation on that theme, isn't it?
Right.
So
Yes.
yes.
As quickly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Professor. We have a question here, a follow-up question in chat regarding the point that we just made about individualized treatment and medicines. And the question asks, can you explain more about vaccines designed to match individual needs? The past 3 or 4 vaccines weren't designed for the individual. This is apart from antiviral medication, the form of which depends on interference with own medication.
Yeah, but but it's a place we've been to already. Sorry, are you hearing me? Okay, just switch to a different microphone.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah, it's a place we've been to already, haven't we? Because we've got our different adenovirus vaccines and our 2 different mRNA vaccines and our recombinant protein Novavax vaccine and many others. And very rapidly, all this kind of folklore sprang up, didn't it, about the fact that we didn't give the adenovirus vaccines to young women because there were those initial events of thrombosis, and we didn't give the mRNA vaccines to people who were prone to anaphylaxis because there were a couple of examples of anaphylaxis at the beginning. So all I'm saying is, in a kind of ad hoc learning curve kind of way, there's been a degree of personalization already. And all I'm thinking is that as we kind of take a deep breath and go into the next phase, there'll be more and more of that, because there's quite a lot of decision making going on at the moment about all kinds of choices on the vaccines. What doses to give to children? What's the best protocol for children? What's the best protocol for people with cancer? What's the most durable protocol? So, I think my kind of mantra has been that, let's be intelligent about it. Let's not do it on automatic pilot. Let's think this through and try and do the best job.
Indeed, and we have all the tools for that. We have the artificial intelligence, and we have, rather than go for a one size fits all. There's a question in the chat, and I will incorporate it into a more of a general question. Dr. Jackie Lewis has just talked to us about the potential effect and then the effect of diet and so on. So the other side of the coin is in dealing with immune disease and deficiencies and so on. What role would exercise play, and just keeping generally a healthy way of living and gardening and that kind of thing, walking and so on?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a surprisingly contentious issue, isn't it? Because you'd imagine it would be really good advice to say, you know, just exercise your way through it. You know, get a life. You know, go back to gardening, go back to the gym, and many people have found that to be really, really bad advice, and have tried graded exercise to get through these things and have come out of it really badly. So I just think intuitively you think, you know, must be my own fault. I must be, you know, I must be a slob. If I pull myself together, I'll get better. And quite often that really doesn't work, and it's not as simple as that. And trying to push yourself harder is actually a way of making yourself worse. So I think you've got to be really, really careful, because I can't emphasize enough, you know, this isn't some sort of moral judgment. It's not a punishment you get for being a slob. Quite on the contrary, many of the people who've got long COVID are almost disproportionately the kind of people who used to run marathons, used to cycle to work, used to be super fit, and now they're not. So it's not some sort of you know, divine punishment of not having been healthy enough. It's actually hits pretty healthy people, and they're having to be really, really careful about how they recover, because I think it's quite hard to kind of exercise your way through it.
Indeed, and that is what everyone says, that a healthy lifestyle is supplementary to dealing with the underlying conditions in the first place. I don't see any further questions there from.
Laura,
there are a couple of,
Laura,
yes, Iris and Michael, and then Laura. So we start with Iris and Michael.
Yeah, just going over that point, what has really helped me, and I hope maybe it helps other people as well, is I'm trying to stick to a fairly rigid routine, and that works well for me. So I get up at the same time every morning, up about 6:30 in the morning. I do probably about 3/4 of an hour stretches actually, and then I go out for walk. I do try and keep to a very rigid routine, and I find that helps. And as I mentioned before, if I've got something on, I don't get the fatigue quite as badly. So I feel that if you can keep yourself occupied, for me anyway, if I keep myself occupied, that seems to reduce the problem somewhat. So I don't know if that's you know, useful to other people.
Sounds good. Yeah, I agree. It sounds good.
Indeed, yes. I think that is exactly what everyone thinks, because it always helps with the general sort of the general lifestyle and general health, as it were. We have Laura, who's indicating.
Yeah, I was wondering about gardening, not in relation to physical activity, but more if you were actually close to soil, whether the microorganisms in the soil might actually be good for our immunity at this time, because we're socially distancing from people, which I was wondering maybe reduce our immunity slightly because we're not coming in contact with the organisms we normally would do.
Well, I think it's quite a complex question. So you know, point number one is I think gardening would be absolutely brilliant, and is just kind of the right kind of level of exercise. And point number two is, you know, the point you raised. I think it's quite, well, it's quite tangential and quite complex. But sure, you know, one of the things that all immunologists believe is that the reason that in modern times there's such an explosion of autoimmune diseases and allergic diseases is that we do have kind of misprogrammed immune systems, because compared to our grandparents and great grandparents and the world that they inhabited, we live a really clean life and don't meet as much mud in the garden, and as many things as they used to, and that's left us with a very kind of off-kilter piece of immune programming. So yes, I get your point.
Thank you for that. I do concur with that. We have Bathsheba indicating.
Oh, hello, hi. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This is really helpful. I was wondering if you could help me. I'm 23 and I had both the vaccines and the booster, and I responded very badly to the booster, very similar symptoms to what I'm feeling now with long COVID. And I was just wondering like what I should be doing. I'm taking vitamins. I have brain fog and fatigue and exhaustion. And I just don't really know what I should be doing.
It's really horrible and really hard to know what to do. But is there anybody in the clinic who's being helpful to you?
So I've been taking vitamins like omega-3 and just general vitamins. I'm living in Israel at the moment, so I haven't got access to the clinics.
Whereabouts in Israel?
Jerusalem.
So and how long ago was the booster?
The booster was like 7 months ago, November time.
Because I'm trying to think. So what you're describing is kind of long COVID, isn't it? And there are good studies in Israel and good people in Israel, and I don't think you should suffer alone. I think you should probably get some help. Because Jerusalem and Hadassah really has some good people, and because there's nothing I can, except for patience and time, there's nothing I can recommend that you can do that necessarily will make you any better any faster. So I'd get myself over to see somebody, I think.
Right. Is there anything you would suggest in particular for brain fog or exhaustion, like how to be managing it?
So all of the long COVID groups are full of what I mentioned before, really motivated activist people who are experimenting on themselves and trying all kinds of different things. And you can imagine from the side of the fence that I come from, I wouldn't recommend experimenting on yourself. I'd get myself into a serious clinic and a serious study and see if there are people who can do some tests and help you.
Okay, hello. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for that. We have Sharon Hood indicating.
Hi, hi, Professor. Thank you for the information. You asked whether anybody had any good experiences with long COVID clinics, and you also suggested that there are some good long COVID clinics in the country, because you were saying get yourself somebody good. How do you do that? Because when I tried to access a long COVID clinic here, I ended up seeing a respiratory consultant who was very nice, and he referred me to the chronic fatigue service. And they've been very helpful with teaching me how to pace better, but no more help than that anywhere. I'm in Manchester.
Yeah, no, I think your question kind of really, it was one of the reasons I asked it. I kind of asked it in a slightly kind of provocative way, because I think things are very variable up and down the country, and your experience kind of exemplifies just the conundrum we're in, that we've got something new. We've got something new we're trying to grapple with. And nobody has ever written a textbook chapter to teach you how to handle long COVID. Nobody has any training in it. Nobody has the right clinic for it. Nobody has the guidelines published for it. So everybody I know who's running long COVID clinics is kind of ducking and diving and going back to their medical school knowledge and trying to do the best they can. And some of them are doing it really well, and some of them are doing it really badly. And so if you're on the receiving end of that, there's no magic answer, is there? Because you can't get referred really to a long COVID clinic in a different place. And nearly every day I have emails in my inbox saying, I'm on Bupa, or I'm prepared to pay any money you like. Can you refer me to a private long COVID expert? But there's no such thing. There's nobody I can refer to.
No, I had ME for many years, and I have fibromyalgia, so I know there isn't necessarily a magic pill that you can take. But so carry on researching, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor. I know that we can sit here and talk about this fascinating subjects all night. Unfortunately, we don't have all night, so I will now turn, unless there are any last minute questions, I will now turn to Dr. Jackie Lewis, who is chair of the Salford Healthy Communities, for her concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you so much, as always, for running the Zoom and for chairing in such a great way. So I first saw Professor Altmann speaking for a webinar on long COVID at Royal Society of Medicine event, and he was the standout speaker.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. So when one of our committee members looked at the advert and said, Jackie, you're somewhat overschlugging, I felt, no, I couldn't overschlug. Because with such an incredible and eminent speaker, we're just so grateful and happy that we were able to have you attend our event and to give your expertise, and especially when you tell us that you're working 7 days a week, so you've been working flat out. If you're doing programs with Vanessa Feltz, then I know that you're talking on the radio at the crack of dawn. So you're really so kind to give us your time tonight. One of the most reassuring things I heard was when you said about people with brain fog, that they shouldn't be scared, that it doesn't look likely that this would mean a road to dementia, and that there should be treatments that will come out and help. And I think that's one of the things people get most worried about. So that's really good to hear. And so many of our audience tonight clearly have been suffering from the effects of long COVID, from this nasty sting in the tail of the coronavirus. So it's wonderful that they've had the chance to get better informed and to understand that we don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers yet, but more will come. And certainly with people like you doing the research and working so hard to find answers for us, then we're very lucky. And we have to really thank you, Professor Danny, for everything you do for the UK. And maybe in the future we'll be able to get you back again to speak for us, but all the best. And thank you, because you've just answered all the questions so clearly and not made people feel like nervous or anything about putting the questions.
Okay, thank you.
So that's wonderful. That wraps up our event. But if anybody is staying on, then Jay may just ask for a little bit of feedback. But Professor, you can leave us, and yes,
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Lovely
thank
to meet
you.
you all. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks, Amir.
So Jay, do you